All right, so as promised, from a DM perspective, it is recommended that you watch the previous videos. It will go through some of the icons that are shown here, but there are some additional ones that are going to be on the screen, specifically I believe it's the quests, the parcels, and the tables ones are going to be different from what you saw previously, and I'll actually show you how to enable all icons so that you can see everything that's available. But before we actually get into that, at this point, all we really have is the creation of the framework that is going to store the actual campaign. We haven't enabled any modules. There are no rule sets that are loaded outside of the Srd rule set or the default rule set. There is no module loaded to run the players through, or the campaign loaded to run the players through. And there's also customizations that should be done in order to set the interface up so that it works the way that you as the DM will want it to work for both yourself and the players. There are some adjustments that can be made. And as you can see right here on the screen, there are a couple of handy quick buttons here that will take you to either the appropriate forums, the PDF file, or the actual forums. Wiki pages in order to learn how to use some of the products or some of the interface elements. But we'll go over some of the ones that are the most useful in this particular thing. So just a quick summary. Chat window here is where roles are going to be seen. Players are going to type in content if you're not using voice chat. It is going to act as the game's ledger of events for things that you trigger. It will act as a record or ledger of the treasures you will hand out, the coins that you'll hand out as part of the rewards or as part of parcels, as they're called, so on and so forth. So we'll run through that whole process of explaining things as they appear in the chat window as best that I can. You'll also note here that there is a GM tag down at the bottom left part of the screen. That GM tag is the character you are speaking as if you're going to type something into that particular chat window. When you are role-playing an NPC, you can enable the functionality of being able to chat as that NPC so that you can really immerse the campaign from a role-playing perspective and make it a little bit more enjoyable for some of the players. Additionally, you can also set up this little chat box to speak in a different language. So in this case here, there is the Infernal language. That is the language that I have spoken. And I'm going to type this in. And as you can see, because I don't have any players connected, it is understood by nobody. And players who understand the Infernal language will be able to see what it is that you typed in that script, and understand what it says. Whereas everyone else is just going to see the same thing that you're currently seeing there. So this is extremely useful for role-playing creatures that only speak with specific languages, like celestial beings, demons for the Infernal language, Dwarvish, Elvish for NPCs that you might be interacting with that don't understand Common, or things like that. And again, it adds another layer of immersion to the whole concept of the role-playing aspect of things. And those are literally just some of the things that you can do with the chat window. But seeing as this is primarily going to be a bit of a setup window, I won't go into too much detail around that. Again, we will be covering the modifier windows and the dice options in separate windows, and the tables, parcels, and what was the third one? Quests options, which I said earlier are going to be new. They're also empty, as you just saw. And again, that's because we haven't finished setting everything up. So clicking on this will be a good resource, but one of the first things that you're going to want to do when you start your campaign is go to the next option for the campaign setup button and click on modules. And the reason you're going to want to do that is this is where you can actually go and activate the modules that you are going to be using for this particular campaign. So you can search for these modules. So you can type in player, and anything that is player specific will be listed here. So if there is a module that you don't want to have enabled, for example, this one here is probably one you wouldn't use. So you can actually temporarily remove it from being shared to the user. So if you are running strictly a Lost Mines of Phandelver and you're not going anywhere near Waterdeep, there is no need for a player on the opposite end of the connection there to actually go through and look at that just yet. Now, there might be classes or items or bits of armor that they might want out of there, but ask yourself, does it make sense for that particular item or class or whatever to be in the region you're in? I mean, there could be arguments to allow it, but it's one of those things. So I'm just going to temporarily re-enable that. But what I'm looking for right now is the player's handbook. Now, one thing I'm not 100% certain on is whether the DM has to have the player's handbook loaded. I think you have to in order to allow it to be shared out, but I'm actually in the process of putting together a question to the Fantasy Grounds support group to clarify that point. But I always load it as a precaution. And the reason why I'm asking if I need to load it is because when I load up this module, some of the items that are in here are going to be duplicated by the monster or the Dungeon Master's Guide. And they're going to be duplicated by some of the other elements here. But you'll see what I did there is I clicked on the load button and then this popped open. And essentially what that means is when you see this as being completely open, it means the module is now loaded. What does that mean? That means that we should now see content. And that content won't necessarily be encounter specific, but it will be player specific. So these would be an example of creatures that a player might interact with, or in some cases control. For example, a necromancer might control a skeleton. A mage might have a familiar owl. A druid might be able to change into some of these creatures depending on their level, things like that. Although generally you start small with things of that nature. In addition, I believe, yep, there will be some tables here, and we'll go over these in a little bit more detail, but you can see the source material that it is loaded from, and you can see the title that is associated with each of these particular items. And there are two ways to actually open this content. You can click right there on the actual web link, or sorry, the highlighted link, or you click here. It works exactly like a web page in that respect. You literally just click a link and it pops open an additional resource. So that would be, but the only difference is it doesn't open it up in the existing window or the existing container window. In addition, if you have a lot of resources, which as a DM, there's a good chance that you will actually do so, you can narrow your scope down. So you can restrict it so that it only displays items that are provided by the D&D player's handbook in this case. And then you just literally go through and search for the item that you're looking for, including doing a search. You can also custom create your own tables, things like that. They will show up here until you assign them to a particular category. And we'll get into that in a bit. Or you can just list everything. And if items exceed a page limit, it will start to actually separate it out into pages. So you have to click another button to be able to get to the next items in the list. But before we even get too much more detail into that, let's go through and load up the rest of the items here that I want to open up. So my characters are going to probably be on the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide. So on the Sword Coast side, oops, sorry, that's the players. I want Sword Coast. So I want, there we go. D&D Sword Coast Adventures Guide. I want the Dungeon Master's Guide. Okay, that is now loaded. I would like maps, and we'll get into what those are in a moment. And what you can see here is it does take time for all of these modules to actually load up. So I will return once this particular module is, oh, never mind, there it is. And you can also see that sometimes it can fool you as to how long it's going to take to load up. Now, you'll note here, this is a perfect case of where there are 3 modules specific to the same particular item. So items that you gain access to from the Dungeon Master's Guide, i.e. magic items, won't be accessible to the player unless you allow them to load the Dungeon Master's Guide players module. So if you block this out with an X, they won't be able to load this, which means they won't be able to use the magic item you just gave them. So this is a perfect example of allowing a player to be able to load a specific resource for a very specific reason. You, however, don't need to load it because this is designed to be loaded on the player side. What else is there? Monster's Manual. There we go. Monster Manual, not monsters. So this book contains all of the creatures, but this isn't going to be a review of 5th edition. This is literally showing you elements that you might need to load in order to actually have a full campaign going. And then these I don't need to load for what I'm going to be doing here. Now, because I'm going to be doing Lost Mines of Phandelver, I'm going to make sure that that particular module is loaded. And that is key because what's actually going to happen is that's going to populate the story module. And there will be some other things, but for the most part, it is literally just strictly Lost Mines of Phandelver elements that are added to here. It will also fill in some quest items, so these would be all of the quests that are available in the module. And as you can see, there are no additional things there. There are also now going to be parcels. So these would be the treasures that they will be able to find, things like that. So by loading these library modules up, you are literally opening the door for your players to be able to start to interact with your environment. Now, I will point one other thing out. You'll notice that there are some Srd rules here. None are currently loaded. And these Srd rules do not need to be loaded if you have the Dungeon Master's Guide and the player's handbook and the Monster Manual loaded. If you only have the Dungeon Master's Guide and the campaign that you're running through, you might want to load up the bestiary. You might want to load up the data. If you just have the player's handbook, you won't need to load the Srd data, but you might need to load the Srd magic items and the bestiary up. So there's a little bit of finagling here. I generally recommend if you're going to do 5th edition, just go ahead, buy the beginner's kit or essentials kit, and that gives you the player's handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide. I think you might have to buy the Monster's Manual separately, and then whatever campaign you want to run through. Or if you just want to homebrew one, Fantasy Grounds is perfect for that, and we'll go through and actually show you how to do that in a much later, more advanced tutorial. Okay, so that should be everything I need to load, and if there happens to be a module that we need to find later, it's dead easy to come back into here and go, oop, I missed this, so boop, here we go. So for example, maybe I needed a sewer map because for some reason the party decided to go into Neverwinter's sewer system before heading out towards the Lost Mines. Well, I now have that available. Those kinds of things. And I believe this one might be available by default, but I'm not entirely certain. I think there were a couple of map packs that came with Fantasy Grounds. Now that might just been with the package that I bought at the time, but they may also have been just simply included with it. Okay, so I don't need that particular module. And unloading a resource removes it from your lists. So if you find that your interface is getting too cluttered and you find you really haven't been using a particular module, just offload it. And then it'll clean up your interface. Okay, so now that you have those loaded, you'll see that these options here from the campaign setup guide, so we're back to this, the Srd, the basic rules, the core rules, you don't need these if you happen to have the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, and the Bestiary. These only apply if you don't have a mixture of those or any of them. And then you would just simply click these buttons to load them up, and away you go. The next thing is the options screen. And there used to be, on the Classic Edition, between this and the options screen, a tokens listing, but that is now being handled by the assets, and we'll get into that in a bit later. But for now, let's go into the actual options. And we will not need this to be loaded anymore. So, in the options screen, everything you need to adjust the interface is here. And it's mostly going to be, how do things show up on the player side? How do the players interact with things? Things like that. So for instance, Auto Center Map is a client toggleable option, which means that if you leave this on, the player still has the ability to set their client up so it automatically centers on the map. There are different options for when a particular character casts a spell, that if they miss one of the many targets that they cast that spell as, and it's a spell that outright negates the damage if they make their save, then that target will automatically be deselected from the character's targeting screen, so that when they roll damage for that particular spell, it doesn't hit the one that they missed, but it will hit all of the others that they did. So that I tend to leave set for multi, and it is highly effective. There are a few situations where it can be a bit derpy, but I'm hoping with Unity that they've fixed them. I've run through a couple of those derpy issues, and so far I haven't run into them yet. So we'll see there. Manual entry. You can literally set it up so that the player can manually type in the die that they rolled. I've never actually played with that. I know that a couple of my players have wanted to, and the previous version of it did it a little bit clunky, so I actually haven't tried it with Unity yet. But generally, there's a little bit of a trust issue, because if you let the system make the roll for you, no one can fudge the roll. Except the DM. If you let the player do it and you don't have a webcam showing that they've made that particular roll, you won't know what they actually rolled, and they could tell you a completely different number. So they could roll a 1 but give you a 2, for example. It comes down to trust. And I know with a pen and paper, some players can actually do stuff like that, but I don't know. I like having the system control the roll of the dice, so it just doesn't give any of the players the options to do that, but does allow the DM to potentially save the party from complete obliteration if he rolled great, i.e., if I rolled a 20 3 times in a row. I've done that, believe me on that. I'm literally on the verge of wiping a party that I have on the go now, because I've rolled consistent 20s, and it literally just happened this weekend. And I'm not sure whether I'm going to, if any additional 20s roll up, if I'm going to allow them to stay as 20s, things like that. So it gives you, the DM, to enforce a bit of role playing in the aspect of it, and continue the game. So I mean, you could be 3 weekends in, and all of a sudden the party's completely wiped because you just absolutely had a bomb night for rolling. 3 games, that's a little bit short, unless it's like a one shot. So those kinds of things can come into play. So I'm just going to minimize that. And this, by the way, is a minimize, maximize button for that particular tab. So this option here, when your combat tracker flips back to, or flips to a particular NPC, it will actually update this series of boxes here. And I'll show you that functionality. I'll turn that on, actually. So that when the combat tracker rolls through, like if you have 5 NPCs, 2 of them are goblins, one's a wolf, you'll have 2 goblins and a wolf that'll pop up here as the chat window. That way, if you have to type something into chat, i.e. maybe there's a negotiation going on between the goblins and the party, you can type in, and it will automatically speak goblinoid to the characters, unless you select common, because they may happen to understand common. Things like that. So that is that particular toggle, and I'll show you that a little later when we do combat. I'll just try to remember to make note of that. All right, show all whispers to GM allows you, the DM, to what's the word I'm looking for here? Spy on players that are communicating to each other. And I tend to leave that on because my players know it is toggled on, so they can start having a communication together so that I can get an idea as to what they're planning. And if they happen to be planning to do something that might affect another player and they're doing it behind the scenes, that kind of thing. That is completely optional to you. I tend to leave it on because I like to be able to ensure that when a player is going to be doing something, it's not a complete surprise to me. So I've got something prepared. Whereas if you leave that off and all of a sudden you see this happening in your group, you're going to be caught off guard. You might not necessarily be ready for it. It gives you a few minutes to potentially prepare for stuff like that. At the same time, there are probably, I've never had this happen yet, but there's the chance that there could be a conversation going on that's not necessarily appropriate for the game. So it allows me to nip that in the butt so that the party's focusing and that everyone's focusing on that particular aspect of things and trying to keep the role-playing aspect going. Show GM rolls. What that is that if I were to roll a die, and there we go, you'll see this symbol here. What that means is that this particular roll is not visible to anyone except you, the DM. And that prevents, or that allows, gives you the option to go, oh crap, I just rolled a 20. This is the last person alive. Do I want to wipe? That kind of thing. It gives you the option to role play out a situation and make it more of a story rather than just simply a die roll. And that's one of the things that my players like about me is that even though I'm hiding the dice, yeah, there have been a couple of times where I could have completely wiped them out, but I let the party slide just a little bit to keep the story going and make things a little bit interesting. So turning this on allows the group, or the party rather, to see those rolls. So you see here, there is no symbol telling you that it is blacked out. But I tend to do this, and apparently my cat wants to be involved. So essentially the summary here is that it's entirely up to you as to whether you want to show visibility or not. If you want to be 100% blatantly obvious about all the rolls, let everybody see every roll, then this is going to be the option that you want to adjust. I tend to leave it off. Show the results to client. Essentially what this means is that every dice roll that occurs, unless they are hidden, will trigger an update on the client side, so on the player side. And in the event that a player rolls a hidden value, or like into a dice tower, which we'll get to in a moment, there's a chance this will still show up to the client. But not everybody gets to see all the dice rolls. Toggling this option shows all clients all of the rolls. Specifically when they hit or miss. So I generally like to set that up so that it's not displayed to the player. Again, that is not because I want to hide those stats. It's because players sometimes need to know when or when not to use luck. For example, in the case of 5th edition, luck is the ability where you could recall an attack and attack again if you felt you missed. Well, that's supposed to occur before they know the actual results of the roll. Whereas if you roll it, they rolled a 1, or if they roll it rather, they roll a 1, they immediately know that they've missed, so they might use luck at that point. But if they rolled a 12, it might be on the cusp of hitting. So you want to have that little bit of risk, in my opinion anyway, you want to have that little bit of risk for the player to say, no, I'm going to use a luck roll. If you have it so that it displays the results to the client, they will immediately know. And there are a couple of states. So yeah, you'll note that there are a few states here that changes things a little bit. So specifically, if results to show results to client is set to friendly, the only way that'll actually show the results is if they have a PC targeted or no targeted, non enemy targeted. And the reason for that is it still allows you to hide whether they hit or miss, but at the same time they can see how well they happen to heal their friend, for instance. Things like that. Show roll totals. When it is turned on, the combined amount that your damage, for instance, did. So let's say you had to roll 2d10 and you did 8 in one and 6 in another. That's 14 points of damage. The game will total that up for you. I tend to leave that on. It's pretty much a non-brainer. It slows the game down if you have to have a player go through and figure out, I did 14. Things like that. It also can slow you down in certain circumstances, you being the DM. So it generally is best to, in my opinion, to leave that on. But if you want to slow the game down a little bit, this is a good option to particularly turn on. Now the Deckle, you'll notice in the background here that we have the Smiteworks Deckle. This is their logo. Now, when I created this framework for this campaign, I selected a number of background decals that would be optional. Which, by the way, don't click this button here because it does nothing but drop you down. I keep forgetting that. You actually have to click the button. Changing this changes the decal that is going to be available. And you can see here that I'm going through a number of all of the options that are available. So I'm actually going to set this up to... I don't need the... I'm literally just going through them all, apparently. So you can go to off. I'm going to go to the Lost Mines of Phandelver. So looks like I have to go through that again. My apologies. There we go. So I like to have the background represent the module we're going through. It drops a hint to the characters, as some of the images do. And at the same time, it gives them a little bit of a moment in the odd case. So the next option, show characters to clients, essentially allows you to see the stats on a particular character sheet for things like the main tab and skills tab. That's entirely up to you, and I generally negotiate, or I generally set that setting based on what the players are comfortable with. If they don't care, then I turn it on. If they do care, they don't want that information to be public because they want to have a little bit of mystery about their character, then I turn it off. And same with the show inventory to clients. So things like the party coins and party item lists are going to be visible to players on the party sheet. That shows whether it's going to be displayed or not. So I don't know if you recalled, but we had, now I don't have a party, but we had an inventory here. So they see this screen and this screen when you have that toggled to off. And I think when you have it toggled to on, they also see this. But we can confirm that once we actually go through and get everything on. So that's either an on-off toggle. That's literally all it is. And I'll go through in a little bit more detail as to what's under that party sheet once I get to that section of the screen. Now the dice tower, by default, I tend to leave this on. By default it is off, but I tend to turn this on. And the reason for that is that there are specific situations where I want a player to roll their skill check or their saving throw in a particular dice tower. And the reason for that is that I want to hide certain situations. For example, if a player rolls a stealth check, they're going to know immediately what that result is if you turn the dice tower off. Now, having the dice tower on or off doesn't mean their die roll won't show up in the chat. When it's on and they roll in the die tower, then it will be hidden from them. that is the only time it will be hidden from them. But a perfect situation is a stealth roll. If the player doesn't roll in the dice tower and you want to hide the fact that they just completely bungled their roll, i.e. they rolled a 2 or a 3 on their stealth check, it's one of those situations where, to be honest, a player isn't really going to know whether they're properly hidden until they're discovered. And that is a perfect example of where I tend to have players roll in the dice tower. Now, the last little while, I've actually had my particular players rolling a lot in the dice towers because there are certain things that I want to be able to role play out based on the rolls that they get. And what it will do is, you don't see it on the DM screen, but what it pops in, at least I don't think, nope. What it does is it pops in a little dice tower that will typically be near the die section. That literally looks like a rook from chess, and the player will just pick the die up, drop it over the tower, and it will roll the die at that point. Now, come on, and you see that the die here that I just dropped, it faded back there, but we'll get into that in a moment. So I tend to leave that on, and I'll show you what that looks like when we get an active game going. Now, combat. There are a couple of ways to configure your combat situation or combat tracker and the map display here. So auto NPC initiative means that when the turn wraps around to the next round, all the NPCs will roll at the same time. And you can set it up so that they all go at the same group. So they'll get one initiative roll for the entire group. They will get individual rolls for each NPC that you have in there. And if you have 20 goblins, you probably don't want all 20 goblins going at once. You want the players to be able to go in and intermix in that. So this is the one I tend to use because of that. The other option is turn it off, and that way you have to roll the initiative for each NPC in either group, on a group or individually, or you can put a number in associated with that particular group and split them up a little bit. You can do it manually, that kind of thing. I tend to leave it on because I don't want to have to sit there and roll initiative for 30 or 40 goblins that I've just thrown at my party. And now it's useful for when you have one or two items or one or two NPCs that you have to roll for, or one or two creatures that you have to roll for. But generally, you don't want to have to do that for a large group of creatures. Changing it to a group can also hurt the party, because if you have 4 players, maybe they're high enough level, they might be able to soak up a lot of damage, but you get a lot of goblins, 20 or 30 of them all rolling at once, that is going to do a lot of damage at the same time to X number of players. So it's hit or miss. It comes up to how you want to play that. I tend to switch this one as well. So NPC numbering. If you have 5 goblins, and I'm going to pick on goblins a lot in this, that are going to be taking part in this particular encounter, you don't want them all to be named goblin. The players won't know which one to choose or which one to target, things like that, unless you're on the map. So if you have a theater of mind situation, then setting it up so that your goblins have a unique number attached to the end of them allows the players to distinguish which goblin they're going to be targeting, or goblins if they happen to be a spellcaster that can do multiple targets at once, or a fighter that has a sweep capability. Not sure if that still exists in 5th edition or not, but anyway. But there are also additional options here as well. I tend to choose random, and the reason I do that is that when I drop NPCs onto a particular character, or the party has stumbled into a group of NPCs, I don't want them to know exactly how many there are. So what this will do is this will append a large number or a different number to the end of them. So it won't be sequentially like the append does. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be sequentially. For random, I might get 1, 5, 25, 34, things like that. So sometimes it can actually cause the party to pause and go, "Oh shit, what did we just do?" Excuse me, my English again. So though I tend to leave it on random, but you can also turn it off. And turning it off is really only useful if you have any extension that can adjust the name of the NPCs as they're added to the combat tracker or thrown onto the map. And there are some extensions that do that. And we might get into one of those a little later on near the end of the video series. But we'll see. But anyway, I tend to leave it at random. Okay. NPC Rolls. That is when an NPC character hits a player character or another NPC and does the damage. Generally, I believe the default is variable, and what that means is that every time, like if a goblin hits a wolf, then they might do 3 points of damage one time. When they hit it again the next round, they might do 5 points of damage. Although goblin hitting a wolf for that much damage, I'm pretty certain it's already dead. But anyway, fixed means that it's going to do the average damage. So if it's walking around with a longsword, it might do 5 points of damage or 4 points of damage, depending on what the game considers as the average dice for a goblin wielding a longsword. And I'm not sure if that's programmed in or automatically calculated. But I always leave it at variable because it removes the predictability. It adds the risk to a particular player. If they know they're going to receive 5 points of damage every single time they attack a goblin, they're going to be a lot more risky in that respect, and just make the attack, or stick around and choose not to run. But if there's a level of variability to the roll, and there's the risk that that character has 6 hit points, and this goblin wielding a longsword could theoretically do 8, they might choose to roleplay that character slightly differently. So it gives them a bit of an option, rather than sort of handing them a card. Hey, you know this guy's only going to do 5 points of damage. You have 6. It means you're not going to die in the next round if you get hit. That kind of thing. The variability adds a bit of risk to that, if you will. Ring bell on turn. When you cycle through the combat tracker, when a player's turn comes up, they will hear a ding on their side. So it'll be the signal to them that, hey, you're up. What do you want to do? That kind of thing. Now, I tend to verbally prod my players because we do use voice chat for the campaigns that I run. But if you didn't have the voice chat option, then this is a perfect way to get their attention. And I'll show you another option too. You can actually right-click on a player's icon and actually ring the bell that way as well. So if you want to do it manually. But this automatically occurs when the combat tracker cycles over to their turn. So it just makes things a little bit easier. Show turn order essentially allows you to see what order they are in the overall combat. I generally tend to leave it at friendly because they don't really have any knowledge, or should not have any knowledge, as to when an NPC encounter or creature is going to go. There should be a level of risk around that, and then the turn will just simply cycle over to them when it happens to be their turn. And they might see, oh, you're going next, but then actually another NPC that's in the middle of nowhere happens to go next. So again, it adds a little bit of risk to that whole situation. And this actually is going to turn into a pretty long video, so I might break it up into 2. Combat GM, I will finish this one, and then we'll section off into the next one into a part 2. So I tend to leave it at friendly, but if you have it off, then nobody sees what order they're going in, except you. If you have it on, they see everything, including NPCs, but I tend to leave it at friendly. Now, effects. So some spells, some abilities, some combat can introduce effects, things like the prone functionality. And in fact, I will load that up. So the effects. So you can actually charm a particular character or NPC. You can petrify them to stone, things like that. A little tiny icon will show up on their map icon to show that particular effect condition. And it allows the players to interpret what it is that they're seeing. So over time, players can actually get an idea as to what a particular effect might mean. But at the same time, it adds a bit of a check and balance, so that if you as a DM forget to apply a particular effect to a character because the spell didn't automatically do it for you, then they can warn you, hey, you didn't add this particular effect to that NPC or to that character. So I tend to leave that on. I think it's harmless, leaving it on. Skip hidden actor. when in the combat tracker, if you have a couple of NPCs that are hidden under the fog of war on a particular map, if you set this to on, it will automatically skip that NPC during the combat tracker and just go in automatically to the next one, which in a way makes a little bit of sense if all you're doing is moving that particular NPC around. But if you happen to be close enough to the party where you can now actually attack and they can't see you for some reason because they're looking in a different direction or they haven't exposed that particular area of the map yet, but the NPC can see them, then it can be a bit of a risk leaving it on. So I tend to leave it off, and I just automatically skip or move and skip NPCs that are often in the Fog of War area. You can still see them. The players might not be able to. Again, this comes down to personal preference. I've seen DMs do it either way. So, and I kind of like both ends, but I tend to play it with skip hidden actor off so that I can do a move and, oh crap, there's a fireball coming my way at the party, that kind of thing. Stop at round start. So when you finish one round and you set it up, or the combat tracker will automatically roll and go to the next one if you have that set to off. If you set that to on, it gives you the option to progress the round to the next level. So if you happen to need to do some additional things before that next round starts, having this set to on will actually prevent that round from auto-cycling to the next starting point, and a player would automatically then go if they happen to be the top on the initiative roll. Setting this to on prevents the round from stopping so that you can do whatever that particular task is and then progress the round to the next one. And things like that. I tend to leave it on because it allows me to do that advanced prep if I have anything that needs it. All right. Now, the next group tends to show how much damage a particular NPC has taken versus how much a player has taken. So there are several levels here that can come into play. So, for instance, standard is where your health bar moves from a green through a yellow to a red, whereas in tiered mode, it goes through a more gradual shade of green to a light green to a yellow to an orange and then eventually to a red. So you see a little bit more detail into how damaged a particular creature or player is. And in addition to that, there's literally just those two. So those are the two options to it, but it combines with the view of the health. So I tend to set it up so that there is a status icon over a non-ally. So detailed would give them information, like for example, the exact number of hit points and temporary hit points that particular player has. I tend to just leave it at a status. So they are heavily damaged, or they are moderately damaged, or they are critical, that kind of thing. The same thing goes for the NPCs. I tend to leave these two both as status because you want a little bit of mystery about how much more damage a particular player or NPC can soak up. And the tiered in combination with these two really allows you to do that. In relation to the wound categories, this one allows the updating of the combat tracker to show information whether they're healthy, wounded, dying, heavy damage, or dying rather, to healthy, light, moderate, heavy, critical, dying. So it provides a little bit more information in there depending on the detail. And I do tend to set that as detailed. So I am going to pause or stop the video here because we're already quite a few minutes into this, and then I will go through the next series of sections, these two sections, in the next video, and then wrap around to finish explaining some of the functionality of these tokens. So I'm going to stop that here, and then we will circle back to a part 2.